What makes a person drop the mask of civility and go against the system? Today we will analyze the story of Nick Hume, a man who lost everything and discovered something chilling within himself. How to recognize reactive aggression in yourself before it is too late. Watch until the end to understand where the line lies between protecting your family and becoming the very thing you are fighting against. Meet Nick Hume, a successful manager, a loving husband, and a father. His life is a glossy picture of stability. Nick is a classic man of the system. He believes that if you play by the rules, the world is obligated to reciprocate. But here lies the first psychological trap, the illusion of control. This is a cognitive bias where a person is convinced that their insurance policies and social status are an impenetrable shield. We see his eldest son, Brandon, a talented hockey player. Nick projects his expectations onto him, unaware that this confidence in tomorrow's safety will soon become fatal. Now, we must introduce a term that will be the key to this video: cognitive dissonance. When Nick's world collapses, his brain will be unable to reconcile reality with his beliefs about justice. And it is this very discrepancy that will force him to seek a way out beyond the law. An ordinary quiet evening at a gas station. Nick Hume waits calmly in the car while his son Brandon goes inside to shop. At this moment, Nick still feels completely safe. He is a successful man, everything is under control. But this confidence crumbles to dust when Billy Darley's gang bursts into the building. For these guys, another person's life is just a way to assert themselves. For them, it is a game, but for Brandon, it is a sudden and terrifying sentence. In a single second, Nick's cozy world turns into chaos. It is important to understand one thing: at such a moment, something clicks in a person's head. Instead of the usual fear, a wild, primal anger begins to wake up in Nick. He realizes that all his rules, laws, and proper lifestyle no longer work. Real darkness has come for him, and now he must decide: remain a victim or become the one who will be feared. In the hierarchy of such groups, the leader's younger brother, Joe Darley, holds the position of a novice who must prove his status. In certain circles, this turns into a brutal ritual, a test of readiness to cross the line for the sake of loyalty. For the criminal cell, it is just a formality, but for Brandon, this alien exam becomes a fatal finale. It all happens in a matter of moments, leaving no time for realization. The moment Nick arrives at the scene of the tragedy, his psyche switches to survival mode. Psychologists call this tunnel vision. The brain blocks all external noise and secondary details, concentrating maximally on the source of the threat. The only thing that remained in Nick's mind amidst the chaos was the face of the one who committed the irreparable. Joe Darley made a fatal mistake by allowing himself to be identified. This image is now locked in Nick's memory as the sole purpose for which he will decide to leave his former life and step onto the path of personal justice. The work of law enforcement pays off, and it soon becomes known that Joe Darley has been detained. It would seem the guilty has been found and must answer to the law. However, reality turns out to be much more cynical. The system Nick relied on his entire life suddenly starts playing against him. Legal formalities and loopholes lead to a punishment that promises to be purely symbolic. At this moment, a final break with the past occurs in Nick's mind. He realizes that the social contract has been unilaterally terminated. Instead of accepting an unjust decision, he chooses the path of personal retribution. Refusing to identify Joe in the courtroom is not a sign of weakness or fear. On the contrary, it is a cold and conscious calculation. By removing the offender from the influence of official justice, Nick strips him of the state's protection. Now their conflict moves into a gray zone where there are no lawyers or prosecutors. This decision becomes the first step toward the complete destruction of Nick's former self and the beginning of his transformation into the very thing he once despised. When Nick Hume decides to track down Joe Darley, we see not a professional hunter, but an ordinary man who has crossed a dangerous line for the first time. His actions lack precision and preparation, but there is something more terrifying about them: absolute concentration. At this moment, the world becomes extremely simple for him. There are no more complex reports, taxes, or social obligations. All life priorities narrow down to one single task. To see this through, Nick goes through a process of internal alienation. For him, Joe is no longer a person with a history. Now he is just an error in the system, a tragic glitch that must be eliminated to restore internal balance. The first direct encounter occurs in a state of massive emotional stress. When it's all over, instead of the expected relief or triumph, a deep shock sets in. The body is working at its limit, and the mind refuses to believe that a decent person is capable of such a thing. But the main danger lies in what happens next. The first such act destroys the internal safety fuse. The psyche begins to get used to harsh methods, and sensitivity to what is happening becomes dulled. Nick has stopped being a victim, but he does not yet realize that Billy Darley and his crew will accept this challenge. The hero finds himself in a territory where civilized rules do not apply, and only the survival instinct takes over. The first step across the line did not bring Nick Hume the peace he expected. Instead, a dangerous mechanism was triggered, an endless cycle of mutual grievances. Now Billy Darley has his own truth and his own reason for action. At this point, the law completely fades into the background, and the only means of communication between the hero and his enemies becomes the language of force. Attempts to return to a normal, familiar office life turn into torture. Nick's internal security system is now operating in a state of constant alarm. The social mask of a model citizen has not just cracked, it is crumbling, revealing a man who no longer belongs to a peaceful society. Billy's retaliation is not long in coming. The incident at Nick's house becomes the point of no return, where not only his peace but everything he held dear finally perishes. At this moment, a bitter realization arrives. The attempt to solve the problem with a single strike has turned into a full-scale confrontation that could not be avoided. The hero begins to justify his own cruelty as a necessity for survival. Although his choice put his loved ones at risk, his psyche finds ways of self-protection. While Detective Jessica Wayne tries to appeal to reason, Nick is already beyond common sense. His former personality is completely erased, and the only thing keeping him alive and giving him the strength to move forward is the preparation for the final, decisive clash. The main moment of transformation happens not in the heat of battle, but in the silence before the mirror. When Nick Hume gets rid of his hair, he is doing something more than just changing his image. It is a ritual farewell to his former personality. He literally erases the law-abiding manager and family man within himself to become a cold instrument for achieving a goal. His gaze becomes empty. It is the point of absolute burnout, where fear vanishes, giving way to icy resolve. When Nick heads to Billy Darley's lair, the very essence of his behavior changes. We see a shift to tactics of psychological pressure. He no longer tries to mask himself or be cautious. He goes openly, showing that he has nothing left to lose. For those used to asserting themselves through the fear of the weak, such a person, devoid of the self-preservation instinct, becomes their worst nightmare. The final conversation between Nick and Billy exposes a terrifying truth. The opponent claims that now there is no difference between them. And in terms of internal aggression, this is a bitter truth. Both heroes find themselves trapped in a blind rage where the value of human existence drops to zero. Nick carries out his plan to the end, but the finale of this story is devoid of triumph. Sitting in his empty house, he is left alone with absolute void. By defeating external enemies, he has completely destroyed himself from within. This is the true price of vigilantism at the end of this path. Nothing remains of your personality. The tragedy of Nick Hume is not just a high-stakes movie script, but a stark warning about how the mechanism of destructive aggression actually works. In this example, we saw that an attempt at personal retribution does not restore justice or bring peace. It only completes the process of self-destruction that others once began. In real life, those accustomed to breaking the rules often target exactly those who blindly believe in their absolute invulnerability and protection by the system. It is vital to remember, when we choose to fight lawlessness with its own methods, we risk losing the most valuable thing in that battle, ourselves. Write in the comments, do you think Nick had another way out in this situation? And do not forget to subscribe to the channel to better understand the motives of human actions and recognize hidden threats in the behavior of others in time. See you in the next analysis. If we compare this cinematic finale with harsh reality, the picture is even darker. In life, stepping outside the law rarely ends in even a semblance of triumph. Most often, such an attempt at vigilantism leads to irreversible psychological trauma or the final loss of everything you truly hold dear. The price of one mistake here is the rest of your life. My main advice for today: invest in your psychological literacy. True strength lies not in the ability to respond to aggression with aggression, but in the ability to recognize a threat in time and exit the conflict before you pass the point of no return. Wisdom is the ability to protect yourself without turning into the very thing you are fighting against. If this psychological breakdown of the plot made you think, subscribe to the channel. Here, we learn to see hidden motives and protect our minds from destructive influence. I'm very interested in your opinion. What would you do in Nick's place if you felt the system was not on your side? Write in the comments, let us discuss. Upgrade your awareness, do not let emotions take over, and stay safe. See you in the next analysis.